Hello there, welcome back to the channel. This is Nerd.World History. Today we're discussing a Celtic chieftain from around the time of the Roman conquest in 43 AD. This man's name was Tiberius Claudius Cogidubnus. Obviously a Latinization of his name. Now there is some confusion and differing points of view onto the actual name of this individual, as by Cassius Dio and Tacitus reference Cogidubnus and Togidubnus, and there are some variations on the spelling, but we'll just go with those, and they may be the same person. But for the purposes of this video we're going to go with Cogidubnus, as I'm personally straight down the middle as to whether or not I think these are two separate individuals or probably the same person, depending on what literature I've read and just generally my evaluation of the Romans and how they basically refer to people and Latinize everything. It varies from day to day on my personal opinion, so I'll leave it out of it because it literally is just my personal opinion. So I lean more one way one day and more the other another. So as I said, for the purpose of this video, we'll leave it out of the discussion. Basically though, Togidubnus is referenced as a prince of the Cativaloni, and Cogidubnus is referenced as the chieftain of the tribe that I really hate the pronunciation of. We're going to go with the Regnensis, the Regni, and he reigned from 43 to 80 AD. He was likely the son of Verica, who was the chieftain of the Atrebates tribe that was overthrown and has prompted the Roman invasion in the first place. He is most famous for having the rather impressive so-called Fishbourne Palace, one of the largest Roman villas found in Britain, that was built contemporary to an amphitheatre, bathhouses, as well as a forum and other impressive Romanized structures in what is now the settlement of Silchester, which was in the territory of the Atrebates, hence the obvious connection to them, which was at the time known as Caliva Atrebatum, the capital city basically of the Atrebates tribe. One of the more developed urban centres of southern Britain, I should point out. Fishbourne Palace in and of itself is opulent, very well made, and is a traditional Mediterranean style villa complex built in Britain very early in the Roman conquest. Literally within just a few years of them arriving, they knocked this thing up. And as I've mentioned it in previous videos, I won't go into too much detail about it, but it is you can visit it. It is an open site that you can go and see, and there are glass panels you can walk over and actually look down on these still intact or relatively intact mosaics that are on the floor, the foundations, the hypocausts, and what's left of the walls and other structures of the building. And as I said, it's laid out to a pretty traditional Roman style, although it is big. It's a very big villa. Definitely representative of the importance of this man during the Roman invasion, well, during the Claudian invasion of Britannia. He was obviously still alive when Nero was also the Roman emperor, overseeing the invasion of Britannia as well. Just to touch on some of the confusion of his name, just to clarify why there's a little bit of confusion. As I said, he's mentioned by different Roman authors, notably Dio Cassius and Tacitus, or at least they're possibly referencing the same person. The Celtic names that the Romans basically Latinize, he won't have been called Cogidubnus, for example. It would have been something more like Cogidubna, something along those lines. It's not exactly clear. Obviously he didn't write it down himself. The name Cogi, which is of Celtic origin, is not a very common Celtic name, whereas Togo is. It's much more common. It's thought that the Romans Laticized it to Cogidubnus over Togidubnus, over Togodubnus, should I say. As I said, different historians and authors have differing opinions on this, which isn't going to be the focus of this video, but that's basically where the confusion is coming from, trying to make sense of Roman writers. And as I've said, Romans are a very good historical source for the events, particularly of the early Romano-British period in this area, because obviously they wrote stuff down, they mentioned people, they mentioned places, they created maps. They're an excellent historical source of information for a period of history that's very oblique from a global point of view, as the Celts wrote very little down, to say the least. Although there is some evidence, and I am talking very, very obscure, almost spurious information, that they may have had writing before the Romans turned up. But if they wrote anything down, it hasn't survived. They certainly were aware of writing. They had begun stamping it onto coins, which implies some of them could read. Literacy was likely not very common, and there is the fairly well-known Ogham script, as it is known, which is a domestically developed form of writing, but Ogham script, which I think is very hard. Most of the lettering of it is just references to trees. So it's a complicated, albeit simple, complicated language. Basically, it's not like a structured language as we understand it now. And how old it is a little bit debatable as well. Going back to Fishbourne Palace, there is some evidence that actually Fishbourne may have originally been constructed for a different Celtic chieftain, but it certainly ended up as Cogidubnus' royal palace. It was constructed in around 65 AD, basically barely 20 years into the Roman annexation of Britain. And considering most settlements in Britain were fortified, the idea of having this open villa complex so early into the conquest implies a certain amount of stability already in the lower areas of Britannia, enough where they didn't have to worry about, I don't know, land pirates or whatever the hell they had to worry about, why they had to fortify everything beforehand. Now, as stated, Cogidubnus was the chieftain of the Regnensis tribe, but he likely succeeded who may have been his brother Verica, who was the chieftain of the Atrebates tribe, and he may have taken over the administration of both of those tribal centres under Roman rule, which is again why he likely had his great palace of Fishbourne in their territory. It's also conceivable that he accomplished this without Roman assistance, but considering the time period and how they were both enthusiastic supporters of Rome, it's more likely that when Verica died, he simply was given that territory with support of Roman troops, or at least the threat of the support of Roman troops to take over that provincial area in the name of Rome. Romans had a habit of turning over local administration to local leaders whenever possible, rather than having their own governors and people put in place, because that basically run the risk of constant revolt. If you could simply have a loyal puppet king run things in place for you, at least until the territory had been fully assimilated into the Roman way of life, then do that. It was cheaper, it was less costly in lives, it was more efficient, and the Romans are all about efficiency. Going back and sticking with Fishbourne Palace, which is probably this man's most known legacy aside from being a Roman collaborator, although again there are a few references to he may have initially resisted Rome along with Caraticus, but I don't know. I don't personally believe that. Again, I think because there's enough confusion over this man's name, it may have been somebody else. Sticking with Fishbourne Palace, it was initially rediscovered in 1805. To put some perspective on this building and why it is of such historical significance, the palace itself's layout is very similar to Emperor Domitian's palace in Rome itself. It's of a similar layout and design. It is also the largest villa north of the Alps in the Roman period, and actually in terms of how big it is, to put it in modern terms, it covers an area of over 500,000 square feet, meaning that one of the most famous royal residences in Britain right now is Buckingham Palace. It's one of the most internationally known symbols of Britain and royal power and authority in the United Kingdom. Fishbourne is bigger than Buckingham Palace. That's how big this building is. It is gigantic. It was a technological marvel, It was stamped onto the landscape to say, we are Rome, we are here, join us and you can have this. At least that's what they were saying to the wealthy and to the poor. Look how powerful we are. Some of the most impressive pre-Roman buildings in Britain were one of the most impressive I know of were known as a wheelhouse, and they were basically a roundhouse, but they were very big. They were usually stone built, although not always, but usually. They still had a thatched roof, but they had actually bisected rooms inside. They get the name wheelhouse by basically being shaped. If you look at them in footprint from above, they kind of look like the spokes of a wheel, and as a result, wheelhouse. Those spokes are actually internal dividing walls. They were much more well engineered. They're more common in southern England. You do get impressive stone buildings up north, such as the Brocks as well, and the Dunes. So maybe pronouncing those incorrectly. But whatever. Wheelhouses, though, were some of the most impressive buildings in Britain. They were also some of the largest domestic habitations. The Brocks were more impressive, but the Brocks served a semi-military function. A wheelhouse didn't. Now, if that's the most impressive house you've got in Britain at the time, imagine what people thought of something the size or bigger than Buckingham Palace, with fine columns, marble, a slate roof, or tile roof. It's marble white walls. It would have stood out in the landscape as a marvel. Its detailed gardens, its opulence, its fountains, its heated floors, its built-in bathhouses. It was engineering on a scale that Britannia had simply not seen before this, and the locals were simply either not organised enough or not technically sophisticated enough or wealthy enough to build independently. This was a very foreign and alien structure to them, but was also somewhat enviable. I mean, I wouldn't mind living in it. It's nice. In short, Cogidubnus is probably one of the most... He's certainly one of the more well-known historical figures from British history in the early Roman period. He is also one of the more controversial. We don't know a stupid amount about him, despite the fact that he was allied with the Romans. He took a Roman name, and that would go, Tiberius Claudius. Probably not his birth name, I think is a fair assessment. But he is something of a powerful figure for his time. He was influential in southern Britain and influential and important in the early Roman conquests and annexations of Britannia into the empire. He led his people, for better or worse, into the loving embrace of Rome. And in many ways, his people did benefit by not resisting the Romans. They were spared becoming slaves, they were spared becoming, butchered and slaughtered and put to the sword by one of the most advanced and powerful war machines in history. Whether or not it would have turned out that way if all the Celts had actually worked together, we don't know, but we again have to put this in context. These were not a unified people. This was like invading a collection of microstates. It was literally like invading a collection of microstates that were loosely aligned, connected by language, religion and culture, but not by governmental structure or allegiances. People throughout this time period didn't fight often for their nation. They fought for a person, much like in medieval periods. And Cogidubnus was a person that held a lot of wealth and power, enough to keep an unruly population swayed the direction he wanted them to go in. As I said, a bit of a polarizing figure in many ways, but interesting historical significance to him. He's one of the most well-known, mostly due, as I've mentioned many times in this video, to the connection to Fishbourne Palace, which is, it almost cannot be understated how impressive and important this building must have been contemporary in its time period. It definitely indicates the importance the Romans placed on keeping this man on their side. As their armies were forging north, the last thing they wanted was powerful local southern rulers rising up in revolt against them, possibly cutting off supply lines, sacking their settlements and other assets in the south that were supplying the war effort in the north, forcing troops to come south and basically getting the Romans caught in a war on two fronts. And also, southern powers may have been in a position to prevent additional Roman reinforcements getting into Britannia, because unlike in Gaul, where you could just march there down a road, in Britain you had to come by boat, and that was a much more daunting prospect for the Romans. So keeping this guy sweet was definitely something that was placed in high importance. So my final thoughts on this man are going to be a question. Knowing that we know that he sided with the Romans, do we believe that this man did what he did? Do we believe that he sided with the Roman invaders for the best future for his people, realizing that opposing Rome, knowing the Romans as well as he did he know that opposing them would have meant slaughter and death for his people, so he joined with the Romans to avoid that fate? Or do you think he did it for his own power, for his own wealth and status in the new order and amongst his people? Did he not care about the fate of his people, merely using them as a bargaining chip with the Romans, that I can present you with this many soldiers, I can present you with all this territory and wealth, in exchange we won't resist you? Now, which of those options do you feel he was actually on the side of? Traitor? Patriot? Self-motivated dictator? You decide. I just want to take this moment to thank you for watching that video. If you liked what you saw, please check out my social links in the description box below to Instagram and Twitter and others. And also is down there a link to my Patreon page where you can support this channel and the others as I try to grow this franchise and do this more regularly. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you for watching, and bye bye.